Report out yesterday, originally from 5 New York Times journalists, Trump's lawyer secretly floated pardons to Manafort and Flynn. John Dowd is said to have broached the topics to Manafort and Flynn's lawyers last year. So here's what Vox says about this. As special counsel Robert Mueller's investigators prepared charges against Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn last year, President Donald Trump's then lawyer sent the two men word that Trump might pardon them, according to a new report from 5 New York Times journalists. Yes, if the Times report is right, a personal lawyer for the President of the United States floated preemptive possible pardons in secret communications with two of the President's close associates. And this sure looks like an attempt to prevent them from flipping and telling Mueller what they knew. The lawyer, John Dowd, who departed Trump's legal team last week, denied to the Times that he talked pardons, saying, quote, "There were no discussions." But the Times sources claim that Dowd floated pardons to both Flynn's lawyer, Robert Kellner, and Manafort's then lawyer, Reginald Brown, before the two men were charged last fall. So, Flynn pleaded guilty to 2 charges of making false statements to investigators last December, and he began cooperating with Mueller's team. But Manafort has not done that, and he's charged with even stronger crimes. He's charged with tax fraud, bank fraud, and false statements. And listen, the point of this article is that this could be viewed as more evidence of obstruction of justice. So there's already been like 3 or 4 different occasions of Trump seemingly trying to stymie the investigation. And in fact, he's been kind of open and upfront about it in certain respects. There was, after he got rid of James Comey, he did an interview where he said, this whole Trump-Russia thing, this is all a bunch of nonsense, so I let go of James Comey. So that's seemingly admitting, like, yeah, they're looking into me over something. I don't want them to look into me over this, so I'm just going to fire him. But, well, I don't know if that's obstruction of justice in the sense that it would hold up in a court of law, but sure, on face value, it sure looks like that. And that's irrespective of whether or not you agree with the substance of the Russia investigation. That's, irrelevant to the larger question of, hey, does this look like he's obstructing justice? The answer to me, and everybody knows how I feel about the Russia investigation, the answer to me is, yeah, that looks like he's trying to obstruct justice. He's trying to get in the way. So if he's secretly floating the idea of a presidential pardon to people who are brought up on charges that were in his campaign, and they're brought up on charges in some respects related to activity that was done while they were part of his administration, well, for you to float pardons to them, that's basically letting them know, hey, if you don't flip on me or if you don't flip on anybody else in the administration, you're going to get out of this fine. So, wow. Now, listen, here's the most important part of this story. And this is just assuming it's true, because we really don't know if it's true. It's an anonymous source, and then I always hate the stories that are like, it's not that he did pardon them already, for example. It's that they discussed maybe potentially pardoning. So it's like, so to call this a bombshell, I think is a little much. They're stretching a little bit when they say that. But assuming that this story is true, if he pardons them, that's a constitutional crisis. Now, you guys know my take on that. We've been in a perpetual constitutional crisis for decades now. I mean, you want to talk about constitutional crisis. How about torture, Guantanamo Bay, no due process, no habeas corpus, illegally and offensively invading countries that didn't attack us, and the list goes on and on. So, I mean, NSA spying, are you kidding me? That's the most clear example of a constitutional crisis I've ever seen. You have a protection from unreasonable search and seizure, and the government's like, agree to disagree. And then they just spy on everybody. And that's been happening. So we have multiple constitutional crises that have been going on for a while. And of course, the media disregards those examples of perhaps even clearer constitutional crises. So I get it when people kind of scoff and they're like, really, this is the thing you're going to point to say it's a constitutional crisis? But listen, if you have, if you're the president or if you're somebody in power and there's an investigation into you and you're doing everything possible to stymie that investigation, yes, as a matter of principle, you shouldn't be allowed to dictate the terms of somebody investigating you. So just to make this a clear example, imagine you're, a common street criminal, let's say, and you've been robbing shit from the convenience store. And then the local police department opens an investigation into your activities. But you have the authority to turn around and say to the police department, no, we don't want Agent Smith on this case. We're going to go ahead and dismiss him. And then, for example, you appoint somebody who's more friendly to you, or, you leave the position blank, vacant. You don't give it anybody, so you just kind of stymie an investigation into you. When you think of this situation in simpler terms, and you give that example, everybody goes, well, that's ridiculous. You can't. If there's an investigation going on, as a matter of principle, the person who's being investigated should not be allowed to nullify the investigation. I mean, that's obvious. That's like, say, if we had Bernie Madoff, caught doing what he did. Imagine if Bernie Madoff had the authority to fire the investigators who were looking into him. Everybody would say that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. No, we shouldn't be allowed to do that. What are we, crazy? Of course he shouldn't be allowed to do that. What a stupid fucking concept. You really think that should be allowed? But since we're dealing with a president, he's just simply interpreting his own powers in the most expansive way possible. So, yeah, he's like, sure, I'll pardon people who were directly involved in my campaign. Well, I mean, come on, man. That's gotta... Number one, that would be a case that if he were to do it, that should go all the way to the Supreme Court. Number two, of course the Supreme Court should rule you're not allowed to do that. You could have a presidential pardon, you could have that authority, but inherent in the interpretation of that authority should be the idea that you can't pardon people close to you, directly involved with you, or yourself, because if you can do that, well, then we don't have a constitutional republic and a representative democracy. Because if you could, for example, just pardon yourself in these situations, well, then by definition, the president is above the law. And the idea is supposed to be nobody's above the law. Justice is supposed to be blind. So this is like really extreme stuff we're talking about here, but I feel like we've just gotten used to it because we're dealing with Donald Trump and we're dealing with this kind of rogue idiot who's in way over his head. And again, just to be clear, it's a separate issue what you actually think the merits of the investigation are. You could totally disagree, with the mainstream narrative of, oh my God, Trump and Russia and hair on fire and everybody going nuts. You could totally say that that's a bunch of bullshit, but at the same time, it's a matter of principle that if there's an investigation going on, the person who's being investigated shouldn't have the authority to fire the investigators or to pardon the people who are part of his administration that are directly involved in this case and have charges brought up on them. Because that's a clear case of obstruction of justice, and that shouldn't, anybody's view of executive authority shouldn't be so expansive that they can basically wash away any wrongdoings of people in their inner circle or themselves. So yes, that would set up a constitutional crisis if he were to do something like that. And everybody, doesn't matter what you think of the Russia investigation, everybody should be against the idea of, I'm going to pardon the people who were in my inner circle, or I'm going to fire people who are investigating me. I mean, it's crazy that we're even having this conversation, really, when it comes down to it. So, listen, with a guy like Trump, it doesn't strike me as an outlandish idea that what they end up getting him on, it could be not the so-called crime itself, but the response to the crime wherein you break actual laws. And that's what happened with Flynn. Was it Flynn or Manafort? It was Flynn, where they were like, well, we couldn't get you on the actual crime, but since you lied to the FBI, that's a crime, and now we're going to get you on that. So it's almost, again, it's like getting Al Capone on tax evasion. It's kind of like a weaselly way to go about operating, but it happens all the time in law enforcement. So with Trump, it's like, well, hey, we couldn't really get anything on the Russia thing, but here's 4 examples of you obstructing justice after the fact. So even if there is nothing there in the Russia thing, well, we got you after the fact because you committed crimes when responding to the non-crime. I mean, that could happen. And that's what it looks like happens with a guy like Donald Trump. So I don't know, man. we'll see, but that clearly should not be allowed. That, the person who's investigating me, I'm going to control them, or the people in my inner circle who were part of, the crimes that they're alleging, I'm just going to pardon them. Well, then let's just not pretend like we're better than some sort of banana republic, because that is 100%, without a doubt, some banana republic shit.